everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of Retail Crime Exposed. The show is built by retail crime fighters for the pros in the trenches every single day. I'm your host, John Matas, and in each episode, we will bring you retail, ORC leaders, as well as the experts who stand in our corner every single day. It's the real-world problems, proven strategies, and investigative insights that move our industry forward. And this show will be the one platform for the voices shaping the future of how we all fight retail crime. And I can't think of a better person to start out our very first episode than the Vice President of Asset Protection and Retail Operations for the National Retail Federation, Mr. David Johnston.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. Congratulations on the show, and I'm honored to be your first guest.
So, when you look at it, David, how would you describe the state of retail theft, violence, and ORC right now?
Yeah, well, this is our third year publishing this specific report, the impact of retail theft and violence. And, we do know that the retail industry has been experiencing high levels of theft and violence and organized retail crime activity. We measured it from pre-pandemic stages in 2019 to 2023 when we first published the report in 2024. And that had an increase of 93% on average, the number of shoplifting and merchandise theft incidents. And then the last couple of years just increased year over year above that. Well, this year, I think we're starting to see some glimpses of progress, but also have to understand that there's some evolution that's continuing to go on. And what I mean by that is this is the first year since publishing the report that we actually reported retailers showing on average a decrease in in-store shoplifting and merchandise theft incidents. For the sake of the report, shoplifting is when they actually recorded it as a shoplifting event. There was an individual that they may have seen take merchandise and some incidents. And a merchandise theft could be something like a known theft incident report, or post-investigation, they found that merchandise was stolen, and that's why it was lost. But to see a decrease in in-store theft tells us that some of the efforts on the retailers are doing in strengthening the stores, putting in security measures, training, and even I think some of the collaboration we're seeing and the changes we're seeing with law enforcement and communities are starting to make an impact. We don't know if that's going to continue on. We'll see what happens next year. But for right now, it's good progress to see that, those incidents are at least appearing to stabilize after multiple years of large-scale increases. Now, on the flip side of that, retailers reported increases in supply chain and cargo theft, gift card frauds, phone scams, e-commerce, and all these other activities that get into that, both the physical and the digital online environments. And when we broke down some more of the questions as to how that activity is taking place, along with the in-store activity, there's still high levels of repeat offender activity, large-scale thefts, and things that really indicate organized retail crime. So, our key theme is retail theft and organized retail crime is evolving, even though we're starting to see maybe some stabilization in-store shoplifting and merchandise theft.
So, David, this is one of those things, and we've all talked about this in the past. Shutting everything down from a retail crime perspective is tough business. But when you shut one area down, that typically opens up another area, sort of like a whack-a-mole situation. And in this case, as you stated, we're seeing an increase in cargo theft, lots of organized retail crime, and then that ORC pushing into digital fraud arena. What have you seen as far as that expansion?
Yeah, well, with your background, that retail is always evolving, that there's a lot of convergence in how retailers are operating and providing customers the service in the digital and the physical environment. We have the BOPIS and the BORIS and a lot of, shared inventory passage of merchandise between the in-store and the online environments. And what we're starting to see here are that the organized retail criminals, the ORC groups, are taking advantage of those gaps and vulnerabilities that still exist out there. That, they are looking at how can they go and take advantage of gift card, fraud, whether it be to access the gift card itself as the instrument of fraud, or to use the gift card as a means of just obtaining merchandise in a different way to go and then resell the merchandise. And then on the cargo theft and the supply chain, we know that that was starting to get impacted even, during and post COVID, but we started to see a large uptick in probably about 2023 or so, which is, when we saw that the 2025 Corca bill, the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, that was altered to include retail and supply chain because the two mesh, that these organized criminal groups, and I'm sure we're going to talk more deeply about them, they evolve. They're becoming sophisticated and more complex. We're starting to see them use cyber criminal tactics in how they go and infiltrate their crimes. We're starting to see them, use more hackers and use more individuals who are, we used to have boosters, right? Or we still have boosters for the shoplifting. And now we kind of have boosters or mules that are going and doing the gift card tampering. So we're just starting to see this continued evolution, and it's going to continue on until retailers can look at how their systems and how their technologies are integrated. Can they bring, as you talk a lot about, that unified commerce and try to close down those data silos? And law enforcement understands how these more complex and sophisticated criminal activities work and how we can get ahead of the laws that are still antiquated in a lot of states, and most particularly at the federal side, to be able to counter these groups.
David, we depend on the NRF and especially your leadership to be able to be the voice of reason and dispel any of the media hypes, as you will, out there in regards to ORC trends and things like that. What kinds of misconceptions have you heard the most over the last year or so?
Yeah, well, I'm just about to finish my 4th year with the NRF. And of course, my priority since coming on board has been to seek and to get passage of the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. And I can tell you, John, that we've gone through several different variations of myths and misconceptions. Earlier on, it was, come on, isn't this just increased shoplifting? It's not really organized groups, and now it's more, it's trying to get an understanding that organized retail crime is not an individual crime on its own. That's where the shoplifting and the fraud and the online e-commerce fraud and the return fraud and all these different types and methods of theft, they can be part of an organized retail crime group. The second misconception is understanding that, all of the organized retail crime doesn't have to be like the former La Costa Nostra, right? It doesn't have to be these crime families. You can have an organized criminal effort that's 2 or 3 individuals that are highly sophisticated and structured in what they're doing. And I think the third piece is really getting them to understand that there is an element and a strong element of national and transnational organized retail crime. It's interesting because we hear about these, I'm not going to say nation state, but maybe nation state actors or non-state actors that are conducting the various types of frauds that you and I and everyone else gets on their phones and their emails. The phishing scams, the Easy Pass text alerts, the calls to say that, the IRS is going to arrest you unless you go and get gift cards. That's organized criminal activity. And because it's all impacting the retail environment, as I said, they're impacting gift cards, they're going after merchandise, or they're conducting their thefts in the retail environment. That's organized retail crime activity. And trying to get legislators and trying to get the media to understand that those are all interconnected is sometimes a challenge, where particularly on the media side, they're looking at it that it's the mob theft or it's the smash and grabs, or it's just the multiple repeat offenses of shoplifting. And that's where we really try to push forward, the realities of what it is and its impact to our national security and our national economy. Because a lot of this merchandise and a lot of these proceeds are either going out of country or going to support criminal behavior and polycriminal behavior that's not only here within the United States, but also across our borders.
It's an excellent point, David. And the byproduct of having these organized groups, professional shoplifters, professional fraudsters in our stores is obviously violence. and we know it's still a top priority for all of the retailers. And you have a unique opportunity in your position where you touch all of the different retailers. What is their approach and how has it evolved over the years, and some of the latest trends in how to deal with the retail violence that's out there, whether it's on our own employees or our customers?
Yeah, well, thankfully, alongside the decrease in shoplifting and merchandise theft, the in-store violence involving those acts of theft also decreased this past year, according to the retailers, and that's what's in our report. So we are hopefully starting to see a reduction in the violence taking place as it relates to shoplifting incidents and merchandise theft. But to your point, retailers also see a much broader landscape of potential threats of violence. Retail, being a soft target, is always susceptible to active shooters or any sort of mass casualty event. And retailers have known and understood that, and they've been very good at putting together programs to help at least respond to incidents like that. But we've also seen a large increase in, reputational and leadership threats. Homelessness disruption was one of the areas of increases this past year, alongside guest related violence. And that's where retailers have to really start looking at it's really their threat management and their threat assessment program as part of their workplace violence prevention program. And our report shows that retailers are doing that. They're taking a more proactive and preventative stance to looking at threats or the risks and the potential risks, increasing the training for management and employees, utilizing threat intelligence tools so that, those outside events that like civil unrest and political disruption or anything else that could come into the stores or into the shopping environment can be, thwarted earlier in the process.
David, we're going to talk about the organized retail crime bit in the second part of this show. But from your perspective on ORC groups, identifying them, investigating them, disrupting them, what are you seeing as far as wins, and where do you see retailers still stuck in the same old patterns?
Starting with the wins, collaboration. I think we've seen a large increase in law enforcement resources, task force, even, states going and altering or creating new laws to catch up to what they're starting to see. And those have paid off in helping to investigate and detect and disrupt, some of these criminals. Retailers are very good at building strong partnerships with law enforcement. State and local law enforcement have been stepping up and putting some resources together. But those are pockets throughout the country. And I think that's where we're starting to see, again, the glimpses of hope, but nothing from a large scale, structure. Because on the negative side, it's still the cross-jurisdictional thefts, the information sharing, the investigative coordination, the differences in state felony thresholds, and even to a degree, loss prevention and law enforcement resources in going after the larger groups. As I've talked to many of our retailers and even law enforcement, some of the challenges is we're not capable of getting above the first or second tier of an organized retail crime group, because once it goes beyond a state or even a regional perspective, that coordination is often lost.
For our first part of this episode of Retail Crime Exposed with our special guest, Mr. David Johnston of the NRF. Please subscribe to our show on LinkedIn or wherever you may be listening. If you have ideas for future shows or know a retail crime fighter that needs to be recognized, please send us an email that I have listed below. So until then, I'm John Matas, and thank you for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time for part 2. Take care, everybody.